the year of Superman. Welcome to the Krypton Report's first episode of 2025, the year of Superman. I am your host, Tyler, and with me today is special guest from Digging for Kryptonite, my pal, Mr. Anthony Desiato. Welcome, sir.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here for the first episode of the year of Superman. Thank you.
Yeah, like it works out, and based on today's subject matter, it works out beautifully. We believe that James, our good Superman of Red, he's out fighting crime, saving some people, doing what he does best. So we're we're okay with that. But yeah, so part of our whole plan for this year, for the year of Superman, is we've changed our format of how we're doing our shows, and we're hope to have a lot of special guests this year as part of the plan. It's just we all gather to celebrate the release of the new film. First of all, Anthony, I hope you had a great holiday season.
Thank you. Same to you. I did. It was a lot of fun and busy, but good. And I got to carry on my longest standing holiday traditions, which include watching It's a Wonderful Life on or around Christmas Eve. It shifts a little bit. And watching at least a few episodes of The Honeymooners on New Year's Eve. So I had
Nice.
to do both of those things in addition to all the wonderful family festivities. So I was a happy camper. How about you guys?
We did well. I got to take some time off work because of when the holidays fell. I was able to only take 3 vacation days, but get 10 days off work.
Nice.
So through some fun machinations of working a little overtime earlier to build up, but yeah, it was nice. So speaking of It's a Wonderful Life, I thought of you yesterday. You'd be very proud of me. We recorded, spoiler alert for everyone, we are also going to be releasing free Patreon commentaries all year long. And the first one connects to this episode we're talking about today is James, Jania, and Solomon and I recorded a commentary for Superman and the Mole Men. And
Nice.
while watching that, I pointed out that 2 of the actors in there are from It's a Wonderful Life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, very good. Oh, I look
I
forward
was
to the
like,
commentaries.
I know that voice. I'm like, I'm gonna double check to make sure. I'm like, yes. And then as I'm watching, I'm like, I also know that voice. I'm gonna double check. Yep, it's from It's a Wonderful Life. I was like, I was on fire. I was doing good.
Yeah. I mean, the George Reeves series, I haven't been taking an official count as we go along, but off the top of my head, there are 2 who come to mind. Cousin Eustace is in the Clown Who Cried episode in season 2. He's the one who's counting up the money, just like he does in It's a Wonderful Life. And then in the season 1 episode, No Holds Barred with the wrestling, Clark's friend Sam, I think is his name, is the guy from It's a Wonderful Life who George and Mary are walking past after they fall into the pool in the neighborhood, and he yells at them. He's like, "Why don't you kiss her instead of talking her to death?" So
Nice.
yeah, so a couple of familiar faces, more than a couple. That's awesome.
Yeah, I was like, we were watching that, and I was like, that's the guy who George hits his tree, who yells, "That's the oldest tree in Pottersville." And then the other guy's like, that's the guy that sells George, well, doesn't sell him, but his trunk for his bag that Mr. Gower picked out. That was good. But all right. So we're gonna do a couple of news points, then we'll get back on our George talk. My first news point I have here, let me pull up my handy dandy notebook here, is to no one's surprise, Creature Commandos has been renewed for season 2 at Max. Like I
Now,
said, no
now,
one's
who,
surprised.
who, yeah, no one's surprised. I mean, who ultimately made that call? Is it James Gunn himself?
Yeah, you know what, guys? I like this. So renewed. Have you been watching it?
I am planning to binge them all when they're done, which will be very soon, and then I'm going to do a Patreon episode about it. But I did watch the first few minutes of the first episode just to get a feel for it, and it felt real familiar. It felt very much like the Suicide Squad.
I
But I've just been seeing posts about it. I haven't been watching it. What about you?
I've been watching it, and I think after discussions, you have the right idea. Because my buddy Brian and he stated that it does feel like you're watching a movie, the way it's paced and kind of moving, and then someone just presses pause on it, and then
Okay.
back a week later and hit unpause. So I think like I think we clocked it up to be like a little over 2 hours if you were just to edit all of it together as a movie, and that's what it feels like. But I'm enjoying it, but it definitely is like the sequel to The Suicide Squad.
Okay.
Uh, the next little bit of information, I've been doing a little bit more reading, but I saw this. I don't know if you saw this. Dollar Tree is going to start selling DC Comics.
Oh, I did come across that. I didn't delve too deeply into it. What exactly will they be selling? Just regular single issue comics, trades? Is it going to be
Eh,
sort of a specialty deal like those Walmart issues? Do we know?
I don't know. And my first thought was, what if they're going to sell like back Rebirth, New 52 type single issues of these older comics that they have in warehouses that they can't really move, that now they're just going to put, out there and sell for. I mean, do you remember like when we were kids, like some of those like third tier comic book companies that you'd find comics at the dollar store
Yeah.
of?
Yeah.
My thought is I'm gonna keep my eyes open, but that was kind of my thought going forward, was like, I wonder if they're gonna do this,
I
because I
wonder.
don't know if they're gonna come out with specials just for the dollar store.
I know that feels unlikely. What you suggested about sort of liquidating back stock through this channel. It sounds like it probably makes sense. It's funny though that sparked a memory because when I was a kid, I remember we had a dollar store, and I remember getting an issue of the Flash, but like a late, it was a very old issue at the time. Like this was a pre-crisis, towards the end of the Barry Allen Flash series, like during the trial of the Flash era. But I remember that. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know at least on my show, I do bag on DC from time to time for the gaps on their app and
Hmm.
certain collected edition practices and things like that. However, I do want to say, getting the books into different places, generally, I'm a proponent of. So this is intriguing. I know we don't have a lot of the specifics yet, and I will also kind of tip my hat to them for this. Uh, the new line, what is it called? Is it the compact books?
Where they're like scroll friendly.
No, it's not that. It's the physical ones. I'm blanking on the
Oh,
name.
um,
It's not compact, right?
no, but
No.
yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah. But the new this new line of soft cover editions of their sort of evergreen works, and they're priced very reasonably at $10, and slightly smaller than your typical trade paperback size, but still plenty readable. Yeah, I wish I could think of the name off the top of my head, but I can't. But you guys know what I mean.
I like this idea. If it is like we said, liquidating backstock, because getting books out there, exposing more people to being able to read them. And some people hold comics as this like, oh my god, Steam, don't touch it, don't crease the pages, it loses the value. And we live in an age where that's not as true as it used to be, and people don't just enjoy, like, I buy comics for my kids, but most of the time, they get tore up or whatever because the kids read them and look at them. But I usually grab them from like the dollar bin, you know, and that's what they're there for. So this could be something really good just to get the characters, because I've told you before, it's like one of my favorite comics I had was a Superman book that I got with a Superman action figure, you know.
Yeah.
So this next piece of news is disheartening, but the Batman has been delayed to 2027. So the Batman 2027. My biggest thought is with this is they say the script's not there, the story, it's not done. How? Like, I don't. If I come out to you and tell you, Anthony, I'm gonna make a Batman trilogy. This is my first. I have to have some idea of what I'm doing, a story. Just naturally, when writing a story, you create ideas that you could continue on. And I know there's been statements of some of Matt Reeves's ideas were used in the Penguin TV series because that was going to be a big part of it. Okay, but really, you don't have the script ready. I mean, with all the shutdowns and everything that you've happened, like even when the Batman was being made, you couldn't have been working on it because you would think they'd want this in faster turnaround. That it's now going to be 5 years by the time the Batman 2 comes out.
Yeah, a lot to unpack here. I mean, I know I've seen people on social media pointing out, and people, James Gunn himself was like, look at all these other superhero movies that have many years in between releases. Fair, but in this modern landscape of superhero films, a delay this long is a bit unusual, and I think does pose some questions. I mean, for me, I just say to myself, it's like, what? Maybe don't date these movies so far out. Like, and I
Mm-hmm.
suppose to Gunn's credit, I know he said now that he and Peter Safran are in charge, right? That they are waiting until they have completed scripts and all of that. Which, yeah, it makes sense because otherwise you run into a situation like this where you have a date on the books that you're not going to make,
Yep.
and then you have to have these headlines of it's pushed back, and it just
It looks
at the end
bad.
of it looks bad. I mean, at the end of the day, I want the best quality product possible, and if it means watching it in 2027 instead of 2026, that's fine. But it is a little unusual. And then, of course, the other question that comes to mind is there some sort of restructuring going on or some sort of shuffling, right? Because the whole idea was that the Matt Reeves, the Batman epic crime saga or whatever it's called would exist in its own separate Elseworld space, right? And that James Gunn's DCU would have its own Batman set to appear in Batman Brave and the Bold at some point in the future. And to me, the idea of having two separate live action Batman movie franchises around the same time like seems insane, especially to the casual moviegoer. So, it certainly begs the question. Contrary to what they've said before, maybe are they reconsidering? Is part of the reason for this that maybe they are going to fold the Matt Reeves world into the DCU? I mean, I have no idea, but the question at least comes up.
It is a great question. And, my thoughts are I would hope that we would have gotten the Batman, say in 2026, so that you could get the Batman Brave and the Bold by 2027, 2028. Because you don't want them coming out in the same year. But I like the idea of existing in two different universes because I like the idea of having this more story noir adult Batman that's serious and then a little bit more of a family accessible, that's the term I like to use, Batman that I can take my kids to see. But by the time this comes out, geez, Solomon will be 12, about to be 13. So Jesus, just saying that out loud is creepy. um
I know. Well, I saw people did the math, and it hadn't dawned on me. And then I saw these posts. I'm sure you did as well about how old Robert Pattinson will be when the Batman 2 comes out versus how old Ben Affleck was when he was cast as this older grizzled Batman, and yet Robert Pattinson is playing like a year two Batman.
yeah, yeah, it's it's like when they announced they're gonna do this younger Spider-Man and then they pick Andrew Garfield, and I was like, wait a minute, he's not. So but yeah, I don't know, like, just wait and see. And then this one we'll just touch on quickly because I know you did a whole special on this, and I'll let people direct you to your Patreon. But Jason Momoa to play Lobo and Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow. Okay. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, and me and my buddy Brian were talking. Jason Momoa, I felt like in Zack Snyder's Justice League played a stronger character of what he could do with Arthur. But then when we got to Aquaman and Aquaman 2, it was just Momoa being Momoa, doing his own thing, which is what he'll do with Lobo. And yeah, I mean, he should have already been Lobo. Like, it's it is what it is. Like, I just hope that he takes it. I don't want to say more serious, but I'm not the biggest Lobo fan. But I would like to see him at least not be like, oh, that's just Momoa in Lobo makeup.
Agreed. But if that's what it ends up becoming, I at least Momoa being Momoa will be more in line with Lobo than it was in those Aquaman movies, especially that Aquaman sequel. I agree. I think everyone sort of sees the potential of this casting and figures this is probably who he should have been all along. Although I liked him as Aquaman in the Snyder films. I won't rehash the whole Patreon episode that I did. I guess the main question that I kept coming back to is just, or not even a question, but I guess what I struggled with the most is just the fact that the DCU is not the full reboot that I think it should be. We have all of
Mm-hmm.
these threads that are continuing from Gunn's projects. He had talked about Blue Beetle being the first character of the DCU, and now you're getting an actor from the previous DCEU coming back as a different character. It just feels messier than it needs to be. But as I said in that episode, it's like I'm saying that from the perspective of worrying about the casual moviegoer, and I'm like, I don't know, maybe the people don't care as much as we think they care. I don't.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know.
I,
But
I do.
we'll see.
I did read Superman Woman of Tomorrow, and we're going to reread it for the podcast next year. But I like the idea of having Lobo pop into that story. And then that would be your best way to introduce Lobo and then spin him off into his own R-rated film. I think that's what the best way to do that with that character would work. You know, you and I talked a little bit online today. I said this was I pretty much believe that Peacemaker seasons 1 is completely canon except when the Justice League show up. And I said to you, and it's more apparent as you watch Creature Commandos, that I would not be surprised if they re-edit that final episode of Peacemaker where the Justice League does show up and have it on there like that from now on, like when Peacemaker season 2 rolls around or whatever, because that seems to be the only thing that's kind of not working with this new DC universe. And I'm going to go as far as to tell you right now, because of all that, technically the Suicide Squad is a DC universe movie.
Yes.
You know, like because we've ripped it apart. We've talked about it, how you have a couple of actors from the previous one and it works as a sequel to that first one, but the same way it stands on its own, and there's more continuity built out of that movie than there was. So that begs the question to you, is it now David Cornsweat's Superman that Bloodsport shot with the kryptonite bullet?
I would assume so. I guess what will ultimately be telling is whether or not that gets referenced in the new official DCU, because as Gunn has said, if they reference it, then it's canon.
Yeah. And that's why I'm saying, like, especially you watch those first few you watch that first episode of Creature Commandos and how they reference the Suicide Squad, Peacemaker and stuff, and then you're like, yeah, it's all together. But that's all I have for the news, except for this glorious Christmas shot right here.
Oh,
Boom.
awesome.
That's a family that knows how to dress.
I know. I haven't gotten any of the 2025 movie apparel yet, but I will. But you guys look great. That's awesome.
I got both the kids one for Christmas and they were stoked to get it. So, and then they both decided to wear it. And I was like, well, wear mine too. But all right, so that's all for news. But today's topic, okay, and what we decided to do is, because we've talked on this before and try to approach this a little bit different, is we're going to discuss The Adventures of Superman starring George Reeves. But what I've done is I've constructed a list of episodes where I've done some research online and looked at different places where they've published the best 10 episodes, the best episodes of the series, kind of cross-referenced, seeing which ones appeared in both lists, and then picked a few and kind of just made a list up of from those different resources, so that we're not talking about too much abroad. We have a little bit to kind of focus in on, but at the same time, we're getting kind of an idea of the show. I asked Anthony to join me because, for one, I know that he owns the George Reeves series on DVD, because Anthony also hosts a George Reeves rewatch podcast. Would you go ahead and tell everybody about that podcast?
Yeah, it's called Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, and you can get it on any podcast platform. And we very recently finished our coverage of season two, and with it, the entire black and white era. So, in our episode by episode coverage, we are officially halfway through. And in a few months into 2025, we'll be kicking off our coverage of the color seasons. So, we've been going episode by episode. You've joined me for a number of them. It's been a lot of fun. It's been educational for me because prior to this, my experience with Adventures of Superman was relatively limited, and now we've been spending a lot of time going through each episode and having a lot of fun and talking about the ways in which it sort of echoes other aspects of the Superman mythology and whatnot. But yes, I do have the DVDs, and I know a question, a concern among owners of these DVDs has been disc rot. Apparently, that was an issue with these batches of discs. I'm happy to report so far of all the ones I've gone through, which is most of them. So far, we're okay. And also, allegedly, we are getting a complete series, a remastered complete series Blu-ray in 2025, according to a YouTube scooper a few months ago.
As
Nothing's
I
been
mean,
officially confirmed, but fingers crossed.
as we should, because one of my references was in 2020 or 20 in 2006 when Superman Returns came out. Is when we got this big push of all this stuff on DVD. So I think with this movie to really help sell it, I want to walk into my local Walmart or Target and see that big cardboard key, thing that has all the merch, but has all these, Blu-rays of all the different ones and they're remastered to really, help sell this. Now, I told you I have all the DVDs. I did purchase it digitally because it was on sale for the complete series for $30. And I was like, cool, because I love watching my DVDs, but this just gives me the freedom to watch it more and easily. So, and what was fun about this assignment was I haven't watched all of my DVDs because I told Anthony that I'm going to go through it with his podcast. So as his podcast is going episode by episode, that's how I'm watching it. So I'm experiencing it and then, listening to the next episode. So getting to watch some of the colored episodes was fun. It was different. And I got to watch it with my kids on a couple of them and my father-in-law on one. So it was fun to do that. So
What did your kids think about those color episodes in particular? I'm actually really curious.
they watched them and they were kind of intrigued by just, at first Solomon was like, I don't really like this Superman. And then he watched it like, what, this ain't too bad. And he was watching it and then he would say, like, why don't he use his heat vision? It hadn't been invented yet, son. I'm like, we got to pull some, stuff. And then he watched Superman and the Mole Man with me. Um, he was interested. Sayla just kind of like was in and out. She didn't comment too much on it. So, but it is interesting to just get them to watch the old stuff because of just like, does it hold up? Is it intriguing? Is there anything that kids still find exciting about it? But we're also doing it for research for something that I hope to announce sometime within the next month or two, because we should have an answer next month. So Anthony probably knows what I'm alluding to because him and I spoke about it before. If he doesn't, he'll know
Oh,
after.
yes, okay. It
Yeah.
took me a second. I'm like, "Wait, what?" But that's good. Now, yeah, I mean, like, that's the one of the really interesting things about the George Reeves Adventures of Superman series is how much it changes over the course of those 6 seasons, where you have this very gritty, noirish, dark season 1, with some intense episodes, especially for a show ostensibly, made for or at least airing at a time when children, would watch it. And then in that second season, we're still in black and white territory, but the stories are definitely softened. There's a little more of a gentler touch. Stories have more of a human interest angle. Season two is home to what I would argue are among a few of like the absolute standout episodes of the entire series. And then you segue into seasons 3 through 6. They comprise half the series because for those color seasons they only did half the number of episodes. So even though it's 4 seasons of color seasons, it's the same number of episodes as the black and white ones. And there we're just fully into very kid friendly, often silly stories. And I appreciate you having me on for this generally, and the timing was pretty perfect because, like I said, I'm gearing up for my coverage of the color episodes, and um, I hadn't seen all of them all the way through yet. A couple years ago, I did a binge of the series, and I just kind of cherry picked color episodes. But I said, all right, before I actually get into my episode by episode discussions, I want to just watch all the color episodes all the way through before I watch them again one by one. So this timing couldn't have couldn't have
Nice.
been more perfect. And I guess my main takeaway is, and I'll talk about this more on my show when I get there, but it's just the stakes are just so much lower, and there's just no real sense of urgency in most of the episodes. There are exceptions. There are some standout color episodes that I found so far, but it just lacks the punch, literally and figuratively, of, of the black and white
Yeah.
era. So it's really just kind of fascinating, like the arc of the series. I mean, if you go from a season one, if you go from Night of Terror in season one to the wedding of Superman season four that was on your list, it's like night and day. It's crazy.
Well, what I found interesting is just how, like you said, how much less of the like fisticuff Clark or Superman battling it is, you know? And I also found how much more, I don't even know what I want to use as the right word, but Superman's attitude gets a little bit more lax. And he gets a little bit more like, eh, like, I don't know. Like sometimes it seems like in those later episodes, Superman goes, like I told you before in one of our episodes, like he seemed like a more of a father authority figure. But then they start playing Lois and Jimmy more as like these dumb children. And Superman's more as like this dad trying to, and I had to laugh because when we were watching, George Reeves, when he premiered as Superman, he was 37. And I'm watching like he's 37. I'm looking at myself like, okay. like, like, you know, I'm like, yeah, all right. He looks a lot older than I feel as these later episodes. I'm like, hmm. But it is a very interesting, and we're going to get into this list. But overall, the one thing I see is Perry White is a jerk. Like this Perry White, like if I was going to rank, I've done this before, ranking the Perry Whites, but this Perry White, I mean, some of these episodes, he was flat out mean. I mean, mean to Jimmy, and I'm like,
Yes. So John Hamilton. I mean, I would argue this is an iconic Perry White performance, and he played the character for 6 seasons. And for I mean, this goes beyond just Perry White. I mean, for all these characters and Superman most of all, as I've learned from interacting with the Adventures of Superman fans for a whole generation, like this is it. Superman begins and ends with with George, and so for a lot of people, like this is the quintessential Perry White as well. For me, and we've talked about this. It's like I always gravitate more to the paternal version that we got on Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman in the form of Lane Smith. He could be gruff and he could bark orders, but you saw more of that personal side and the humanity. It's funny though. I mean, I feel like more often than not, like that's actually more of an outlier. That version of Perry. I feel like often what we get really is this, unfortunately, more one note, like very gruff interpretation. One of the things in watching all these episodes, like they're few and far between, but in Adventures of Superman, there are instances where you see a little bit of a softer side of Perry. In the No Holds Barred episode in season one, there's a moment where Perry thinks that Clark might be jealous of what appears to be a budding relationship between Lois and one of the wrestlers, and he asks Clark, like he brings it up, and but not in a way like get out, snap out of it, Ken. Like he actually shows a little bit of concern. I'm sure there are at least a couple of others that are slipping my mind at the moment. Oh, because I watched this so recently, this is on my mind. The Stamp Day for Superman short film that was commissioned by the
mhm.
Department of the Treasury and distributed to schools and civic organizations, encouraging kids to buy saving stamps. And I wonder if this was because it was for kids, where they really softened it. But there's a moment in this, I was floored by this, where there's a scene where Perry barks, bites Clark's hat off as he always does. But then in a subsequent scene, they're in Perry's office, And Perry stops Clark and he's like, "Hey, Kent, just so you know, I didn't mean that earlier." And I was like, "Who is this guy?" So, but those instances are rare. I mean, that I share your gut reaction because that's one of the things I keep butting up against as I'm watching these episodes where it's just he's so gruff and he seems just perpetually annoyed with
Hmm.
these people to the point where why do you even have them working for you?
For real. Um, my I will say I do not have yet a perfect Perry White. Like I like the Lane Smith and I like the Jackie Cooper. If I could kind of mix those two together, I think I would get my preferred Perry White. But yeah, I don't have one that I'm really like. That's it right there yet.
Well, we
So
got Bunk from The Wire coming up in the James Gunn movie, and I have high hopes. I hope.
yeah, I mean, all we can do is hope, right? But let's get into some of these episodes here. The first one that, and sadly, the only one that appears from season one is the Human Bomb, which is season one, episode 21. Now, I messaged Anthony. What's interesting is I usually pull a lot of my stuff from IMDb, um, and I was pulling it from the articles, but the season episode numbers did not match up with my DVDs, but they did match up with my digital buy. So that's always an interesting thing.
Did you find that
Um,
with the other seasons or just season one?
well, I discovered it when I got into season 4.
Okay, interesting. Because I did
That's what.
encounter that there were a couple of instances in season one where when I was doing my rewatch between the DVDs and like IMDb and Wikipedia, like just various places, I was seeing some discrepancies. Nothing that extreme, but here and there. But in any event, we had our episode titles. I have to tell you, I was surprised at your list, how how light on season one it was, and how heavy it was on the color episodes. Your season two representation tracked, although you left off probably what I would argue is like the best episode of the series. Even I know Panic in the Sky, we all go Panic in the Sky, but the Face and the Voice, I'm very partial to that one.
It was
But
it
yeah,
was
season
on there.
one. But yeah,
I didn't want to do too many episodes. I wanted to kind of keep it like about 10, and I wanted to get a kind of an all-around representation. Um and like I said, I was comparing the list, and if I had a little tally board. If it came up more than times on on the different lists, I was like, check, check, check.
dude, season. I
Uh,
mean, I will say I don't know if I had to pick one one representative from season one. I don't know that I would have gone Human Bomb, but it's a super fun episode. Like I'm glad you picked it because it is one that I liked a lot from that first season.
I do want to throw a quick thing to our listeners that if you do watch season one, and this is talked about in our upcoming Patreon, the last two episodes, The Unknown People, part one and part two, are a re-edit split of Superman and the Mole Men. And I just wanted to throw that out there. And through our discussion, I really think it works better as being the TV series last two episodes than a movie. Because it's only a 58-minute movie. And I think if you look at how it's just Clark and Lois, it makes a little bit more sense coming out of the show, like they're on an assignment, than it does. And it technically is, it's either Phyllis Coates' introduction to for Lois Lane or her last thing as Lois Lane.
No, I agree because it doesn't give you any setup, any backstory. It doesn't introduce the characters. We just start following them into this story that is set completely outside of Metropolis and the typical Daily Planet setting. So it is an outlier, but not in a sense where I'm like, oh yeah, again. I think as to your point, I think as a two-part finale to season one, it puts I think an effective punctuation, at the end of that season. Uh, yeah, I agree with that. I think that is the way. I think that is the way to watch it, especially if you are new to it. Because if you watch the show and you follow the episodes in for example, the DVD order, you'll start with Superman on Earth, which gives you the origin of of the character and the beginnings of his time in Metropolis, which I think is a more effective way to start the series.
I agree. Um, Now, just a quick shout out to Kirk Allen. Um, Kirk Allen was the first Superman of the movie serials. I'm not going to do a whole episode on Kirk Allen because I'd have to bring Anthony back because he's like the only person I know who has those and watched those. And Anthony and I've already talked about those, so go check out our podcasts and our back catalog on those
Yeah,
where
I'm
we
not doing
watched.
those again, man. I'm not. Yeah, Tyler came on Digging for Kryptonite, and we had a great conversation about those Kirk Allen serials. And unless I came up with some new angle or like someone paid me, I don't think I could really sit through those again.
I made
Uh,
that comment with Solomon. We were talking about. I was like, buddy, I watched them because we were talking about like being a fan of something and going back and understanding it, where it comes from, and I said, I don't know if I can go do the serials again, but just wanted to give a shout out because he is kind of the forgotten Superman. Because everyone thinks of the original Superman, they think of George. Um,
yeah,
but
credit where credit's due. No, well said.
so here we go. Superman episode 1 or season 1 episode 21, The Human Bomb. Bet a million, Butler, who will bet on anything, wages $100,000. He can keep Superman under his control for 30 minutes. He shows up at the Daily Planet, abducts Lois Lane, forcing her onto the ledge of the newspaper's office building. Butler, calling himself only the Human Bomb, has strapped dynamite to himself. After Superman arrives, the Human Bomb says he'll detonate the explosive unless Superman agrees to stay put for 30 minutes while a robbery takes place. Superman agrees, but has no intention of allowing the robbery to take place. All right. First of all, this episode, $100,000 in 1953. I didn't do the calculations, but that's still a lot of money even for today. Like, I'll
Yeah,
bet
no, for
100,000.
sure.
So it's like, holy cow, dude. Um, I liked this one. I thought it was fun. I liked the how Superman does the no, I had it written down, but I can't.
No comment until the time limit is up. One of the most
Yes.
famous lines in the series. I think if you ask any Adventures of Superman fan, generally, and especially if you ask them about this episode, that's the line. No comment until the time limit is up, which is
The,
how he affects his ruse and makes Butler think that he's sitting there where he's actually gotten the police officer to take his place.
with yeah, he sits down and he has Jimmy record him saying that, and he walks over there, talks to him, sits back down, and then he switches with the police officer with his coat up like a cape. And every time that he tries to say something, they flip it, and that's Superman talking. And I thought it was clever and crafty. And I also thought that here's another Jimmy Olsen, like in this, is very like courageous, where he thinks he figures out the dynamite's not real, and he's just bluffing, and he goes out there to fight him to save Miss Lane. And I was like, it's pretty ballsy, Jimmy.
Yeah, he's very bold, very bold, Jim Olsen. This and aside from no comment until the time limit is up, this has one of my favorite exchanges, certainly of the first season. I don't know why this stood out to me so much, but I've seen the episode now a number of times, and it always makes me laugh when Lois and Butler are out on the ledge, and he offers her a cigarette, and she says, "No, thank you." Now, first of all, I don't even smoke. I've never smoked in my life. If I were in that situation, though, I might. If I were out on a ledge, strapped to someone or with a dynamite, I might. Or I guess that would really be pushing your luck with the dynamite. But just the fact that
That was
she,
my first thought. Like,
yeah, but just the fact that she minds her manners. No, thank you.
oh, you always gotta you always have to have manners.
Yeah, and I think
Um,
this is also notable because we see Superman make a catch. Right, he catches Jimmy. Right,
yes, yes.
and look, the
It's
effects
like a
are very rough, but keep in mind that this was the early 50s and this was unusual for them. I mean, I think anyone who knows the show at all, we're very familiar. They came up with this pan essentially that George would lie on, and then there were this standard stock shots of him flying, and they had various backgrounds and whatnot, and that was primarily like the vast majority of the flying was that. And then we know how they did the takeoffs and the landings and all that. He would jump off the springboard. But so you basically you knew what you were getting when he was flying for the most part. So this really mixed it up, and it was rough by today's standards. But I appreciated the ambition of them attempting to show that.
Yeah, because we talked about that with the flying, um, because I referenced how, in the Kirk Allen serials, when he would go to fly, it would switch to animation, and that was him flying, and I'm like, how they actually were trying more to make it more believable.
Yeah.
Um, but I did like this. The human bomb was fun, and it is, I used to not be a fan of Phyllis Coates as Lois, but I've come to really like Phyllis Coates as Lois. Um, and and Janine and I had a little bit of that conversation when we were watching Mole Men and everything about it. So I, yeah, I made the comment to her that Phyllis Coates may be the best Lois Lane in a movie, and Janine just looked at me. I was like, she already beat Kate Bosworth. We
Oh,
sure can make an argument for Amy Adams, and Margot Kidder's not my favorite. So, and my wife just looks at me like, "You're just trying to make the fans mad, aren't you?" I'm like, "Oh yeah,
Phyllis
I like,
Coates was a great Lois, and I have to say, when we did all of our season one discussions, I virtually every single get we had the same conversation many times where people were like, no disrespect to Noel Neal, who took over the role in season two, and of course also played Lois in the serials. But I really like Phyllis Coates better. That was again almost to a person in terms of who I had on, and that's very much the way I feel as well. I really preferred the the edge and the intensity that Phyllis Coates brought to the role in season one, and also the material uh, complemented her
yes,
as well. And so when you get into the even season two, and then certainly in the color seasons, uh, between Noel Neal's performance and just her personality generally. Coupled with the way they were writing for Lois, or in a lot of instances not writing, like she wasn't as much of a driver. I felt as she
yeah."
was in the season one. So it just led to a much different take on the character.
So now we're gonna go to season two, episode one, 5 Minutes to Doom. Tum tum tum. In this episode, Clark Kent and Lois Lane interview Winters, a man on death row. As Clark listens to Winters' story, he checks the convict's pulse. It remains steady, and Clark is convinced that Winters is innocent. Clark's suspicions are confirmed when he and Lois pick up a hitcher on their way back to Metropolis, and the hitchhiker leaves a bomb meant for the reporters. The Daily Planet's reporters search for a way to clear Winters. They obtain key evidence, but a violent electrical storm has knocked out telephone services between Metropolis and the state capital. Superman flies to the governor, convinces him to sign an order stating the execution. But can he get to the prison in time to prevent an innocent man from dying in the electric chair? This is a great episode. This is straight out of Action Comics.
Yeah, this was a real strong start to season two, and in a lot of ways, a precursor to the late Mr. Kent episode of Superman the animated series, right?
Yeah.
Using his super hearing to to track the pulse and determine that the convict is actually innocent and all of that. But yeah, very strong. I mean, how did you like the way the hitchhiker bomb situation resolved itself? Because that's a standout moment of the episode.
I have to laugh because George has a fun way of playing with the audience, almost like breaking the fourth wall and looking at the camera type thing. But in this one, I loved it because the line where, you know, he gets Lois out of the car and he like takes the car and like drives off and says, it jumps out and it goes off and like it rips the front of his or she's in the car and he gets the bomb out and it blows up and rips his clothes, and you see the Superman, shield, his shirt, and he's down there, and he's like, "Lois, I can't come up the way I am. I'm not decent. Can you toss me the trench coat?" And I thought that was funny because it's like she's thinking, "Oh no, Clark's exposed," but really, it's exposed because of his Superman suit. So I thought that was funny, like kind of without being overly wink wink.
It's funny because it's the first of a number of instances in season two alone where Clark is shown without his glasses to the other characters. And of course, no one ever recognizes. I mean, Panic in the Sky is probably the most egregious example. Um, but you know what? I've said this a number of times. I don't mind it because to me, it's just like it just goes to show it's not only the glasses
Hmm.
that accounts for why they don't recognize him. But it was just funny. And the other thing too, I talk about this all the time as well. Where you know, Lois will have these cracks from time to time about what a coward Clark is, but then look at what he does in this episode. He jumps out of the car with a bomb. So I feel like
This Clark
her
is
insults are really not founded.
this. I don't remember what episode it is. It's one of these that we watch where they're like, Clark, where have you been all the time? He's like, well, I was looking for you. We were supposed to have lunch. Like, there's this Clark is nowhere near a coward. Like they try to make him like, oh, mild mannered. Where he's the most authoritative, strong willed, like I'm Kent, newspaper man. Like, and
Every now and then, the Jet Ace episode in season 2 with Perry White's nephew, the pilot. There's a moment in there where Clark has to excuse himself from the general's office where they're watching the flights, and he's just like, "Oh, I'm getting nervous. I have to leave." And then even in I think it was the Human Bomb episode where he pretended that he thought the bomber was a publicity stunt, right? Wasn't that the one?
mm-hmm. Yeah, that because
Uh, so
yeah.
like there are instances here and there where he will put on a little bit of a show, but once again, those are few and far between. Like by and large, yes, this is a very confident, authoritative Clark, which I like. But then it just makes it a little bit harder to buy when they're like, and also, he's always the first person anyone ever calls for when they're. It's always like, oh, tell Clark, let Clark know.
Yeah.
Yet he's this coward who can't accomplish anything. So, yeah, that's always a little tough to square. I feel like they wanted to have it both ways with that.
So now we're going to do season 2, episode 6, The Defeat of Superman. Criminal Happy King returns to Metropolis, determined to rid himself of Superman. He has hired a European scientist who has found a way to manufacture synthetic kryptonite from a fragments of the substance. In their first test, Superman feels a sting from a bullet with a small fragment of kryptonite. Now the scientist made a bar made of kryptonite, and Happy King sets a trap. Um, I liked this one because I liked the like we have kind of this Superman walking through like a gauntlet. He's getting shot and by multiple bullets of different calibers and style. And one he actually feels, and then the guy talks about he looks at the different bullets and how they collected them, and like and he comes up with the kryptonite. Yes, the kryptonite. Uh, and then this is when like they're trying to figure out what to do. Jimmy and Lois and him are all trapped. Like, let's put it down the sink.
Yeah. Uh, Momentous for the first instance of kryptonite on the show. The gauntlet scene was cool, and I liked that Lois and Jimmy have to save Superman for a change. That's probably my favorite aspect of this. I had a lot of problems with this episode because the notion of Superman being from Krypton, like I feel like that's just thrown away in here, and it's never clear that Superman even knows he's from that specific planet. Because we have the Superman on Earth origin episode in season 1, and we see the baby Kal-El on Krypton and all of that, but it's never clear exactly what Clark knows about himself. And even the way the scientist is so quickly able to theorize about the kryptonite, and then I think most of all, it was very nebulous to me and my guest when we did that episode. And I'm curious what your take was. Like, did was it clear to you whether or not Superman had ever encountered this before?
Right. That I took it as he hadn't, just because it didn't feel like he had. But the way they reference Krypton, um, like a how's he say it? Hold on, like a dead planet, like Krypton, And I'm like, okay, I'm trying to go back in my brain, like, do people know that Krypton's destroyed? They know Superman's from Krypton. Has it wasn't addressed yet in this series. I'm trying to remember. So I took it as he hadn't been exposed to it yet. So
Yeah, I don't. I mean, ultimately, I think that's probably my gut, and I think that's the case. But I just feel like there were just kind of his response to it, his react, the way he was talking about it. It wasn't entirely clear to me, and even just the fact of him being from Krypton and people knowing about Krypton, it just felt like that was kind of thrown away, and that was a big deal. And like when I did that episode, I had people talking about how uh, the TV show followed the radio
Mm.
serial, and there was overlap. I mean, not that they literally shared the same continuity, but I think sort of the idea maybe was that people had these gaps filled in by radio episodes that they had in their heads, and maybe that's why the show didn't feel the need to account for so much in the episodes. I don't know. Like I really I don't know the answer, but that was definitely something that bugged me because it just felt like, man, there was a little bit more we could have done here with this.
I try to explain to my kids, like, when this show came out, if you look at this show starting, it's only starting 12 years after the character's been introduced, at a time where exposure and stuff, it moved a little differently. And TV's a new medium, like the Superman serials were some of the last theatrical serials made because that idea of storytelling was being shifted to television. So, this is early TV. We still have radio as a thing. Um, so I'm trying to explain that to my kids how, it works and everything. Cause, a lot of the observations that we made, like when I was watching some of these with my father-in-laws, you have a lot of these episodes that feel like you're basically filming a stage play with the way the angles and the acting is. And Jania mentioned how, like, if you listen, some of the dialogue is so quick. Like, they say things quick and they don't give themselves time to breathe in between lines. It's like I would say a line and then you like just as soon as I finish saying it, it's like almost as if you forgot your line. You're coming in quick. And it was an interesting, different rhythm to performances.
No, that's a great observation. I guess the last thing with this, it's also odd. Not, it's fine, but I just took note of the fact that we jumped to synthetic kryptonite so fast, right? I mean, we'll get organic kryptonite in the next episode on your list here, but just interesting, right? Like the doctor had like this little sample that they use for the test and of real kryptonite, and then they create the rest. It's like I said, just interesting because virtually all these other adaptations and the comics as well. It's like you start with the real thing, and then when that's not available, then you get these experiments to create kryptonite. But here, man, they just jumped right to it.
It's like we don't have any. Let's make it. Okay, so the big one, which what I think is hilarious is this is season 2, episode 12. So it's 212. Anthony, you want to take a guess when my birthday is?
Oh, February 12th. Right on.
So 212. Good job there, Superman. Panic in the Sky. One of the highest, if not the highest rated episode of the series. My list I'm going by is just by season, but Superman rams a giant asteroid on a collision course with Earth. The impact causes the asteroid to now orbit the planet. However, Superman is staggered as he returns to Earth. He manages to change back to Clark Kent, apparently a reflex action, but doesn't remember who he is. Meanwhile, the orbiting asteroid still present hazard for Earth. I cannot talk today. Only Superman can place an explosive device that will demolish the asteroid, and no one, including Clark, knows where he is. I like the way this episode starts, with everybody looking up. I like in this episode that you have, Superman fly up, hit the asteroid, and this is where, he said Clark falls back and he doesn't have his memory, and I like that he changes back into Clark out of like muscle memory, I guess, But then we have the great scene of him in his apartment, and he's changing and he's undoing his tie and his shirt, and he opens the shirt, and it's like he's in the foreground while Jim's in the background, and he never turns around, and Jimmy's talking to him and Clark's not really responding. He's like, I'm gonna get a shower, and he goes in his closet and we find some of his other shirts. He's got more than one suit, we learned that. and then like he falls through the glass in the shower. Um, and I don't know about you, man, but listen to Jim Olsen this episode. I wanted some of that coffee and sandwiches. I want to know what kind of sandwich and what kind of coffee. In my mind, it's like the most dry, gut wrenching black coffee there ever was, because I just feel like that's a 1950s man's thing, like just dirt black coffee. But he's like, I'll go get some coffee and sandwiches. Um, but I mean, it's a great episode, and a title that's been used in other Superman mediums as well.
Yeah, the Superboy TV show would do a version of this story. Lois and Clark would as well, and they didn't share the same title, but they followed the same storyline of Superman trying to stop an asteroid and losing his memory, and having to figure out who he is. And then, of course, the comic book storyline in the early days of the Triangle era, the Brainiac storyline, they used Panic in the Sky because editor Mike Carlin and the creators of that era were big fans of Adventures of Superman. Yeah, this is a stand. I mean, this is one of those ones where like everybody cites it, but I think its reputation is earned. And I
Mm-hmm.
think what makes this so effective is that the stakes are the highest that we've seen. I mean, this is an extinction level event with this asteroid approaching. So we're just kind of on a different scale than we have been in any of our other episodes. To your point about the way it opens, like we're already in this. This threat is known, it's looming. Superman's working to stop it. So you don't have that typical setup. There's an even greater sense of urgency here. There's this uh, suite of music that is used throughout season two, but I don't think it's ever used more effectively than it is here. Like the music really conveys the weight of what's happening, and then I think hand in hand with how grand the scale of this is, ultimately it becomes this very personal struggle for Clark to remember who he is. And those scenes that you cited when he's in the apartment with Jim, but then even later when he's by himself and he's in the costume and he's got his glasses on and he's frustrated and he hits the chair and it breaks. And what's fascinating too is like even at that point, and when he flies off and he's still not 100% sure who he is. Like he's figuring it out, but he's still not all the way there. So you see that courage and that selflessness and that willingness to sacrifice, even if he's not entirely sure he can do it. But I really think that that combination of the grand scale and the high stakes with that really personal struggle, and the last thing I'll say is just the fact that you see him in between costumes, right?
Yeah.
When he opens the shirt and you see the symbol underneath, and then when he's in the costume with the glasses, you never see that on the show. Like this is not a show with shirt rips and him changing back and forth. It's always like he runs into the closet and then he's in the Superman costume. So I think there's something very striking and effective about seeing the two versions of himself blending like that when the show almost never showed you that.
I agree. And I also started thinking, I think that this episode transcends time and culture,
Yeah.
because there's nothing in this episode that really pinpoints the 50s or anything. Like you could almost take this script, I think, and then just reshoot it, same script, and set it in any time without, we don't have to make a lot of changes for technology or anything like that. It's the human story with it that, like you said, they did versions in other Superman. That's why. It's because it's such a good base level type of story that you can just recycle it again and again.
Yeah, it's like A
And
Star is Born, right?
yeah.
That's gone through all these different iterations. Yeah, I agree, man.
And then the next one I have for season 2 is Around the World with Superman. A blind girl enters a Daily Planet contest in which the winner will go around the world with Superman, but she has entered the contest using her mother's name, intending that she would win. The mother, meantime, wants nothing to do with all of this and being secretive. Clark works to figure out the puzzle using his supervision, determines the girl's sight can be restored. All right. My first thing about this episode is it really feels like two episode stories that were shoved into one.
Oh, interesting.
because I really feel like you have a great story with this idea of the contest and who wins. But the little girl, you know, like it would have been nice if we understood because they're explaining to this little girl, like, oh, you misunderstood. Superman's gonna fly you around and it's for a child. And but we as the audience really didn't get that information before. So I think you could have fleshed that out a little bit more. And then you have her blindness that Superman's able to heal because of his X-ray vision and sees, the piece of glass that's in the optical nerve. And then you have the stuff with her dad and all that too. So like it's a very layered episode. But my favorite part of the episode is the little girl is blind. She doesn't believe there really is a Superman. And the way that Clark shows up as Clark, but just talks to her as Superman. And she even says, like, you sound a lot like Mr. Kent. I thought was great. But then the way he has to demonstrate to her that he has these abilities, like, she touches the piece of pipe or the fire poker, and then he bends it. She feels it bent. And he bends it back. And where he tells her, whisper something, I'll be in the other room and I'll hear it. That was my favorite part. And then when Lois is like, oh, Clark's upstairs. And he's like, he has to go change into full Superman outfit. And then, yeah, Clark left, but I'm here. Oh, Superman, so.
Yeah, it's a very heartwarming story. Unusual in that there's no bad guy in this. I guess
I,
not unlike Panic in the Sky, but in a different way. I mean, this was so personal. And that scene that you cited, that for me is the highlight as well of Clark proving that he's Superman to this little girl. I think anytime George Reeves acted in a scene with a child, there was just this other side of Clark or
of him,
Superman that
yeah.
came out. And yeah, I think that's really born out of George's just innate uh, persona and essence. And it was always wonderful to watch. And so that was on full display in that scene. It's funny because they did at this time, right? There were a lot of comic book issues that mirrored the plots because they were a lot of these stories were kind of developed in tandem, and often the comic books would be published later. But there's a comic book version of the story. In the comic book, Superman performs the surgery. I much preferred the track that the show took, where he guides the doctor. Like that felt like the way to go. And then it was a real like this could have we talked about this. This was our last episode that we did. I mean, like this could have been the series finale. It had a
Yeah.
different feel to it. And a very celebratory mood as everyone is listening in on the radio as Superman is flying the girl around. Somehow he's able to make it around the world in 2 hours. I don't know why they felt the need to put that that specific amount of time on it, but okay. But it was really just like this extended celebration as he's flying her around and then reunites her with her father who had been out of the picture. And really just like I said before, with season two, I think you got a lot more of these human interest stories. Even going back to 5 Minutes to Doom, like there was this innocent man who was sentenced to die to help him. Other instances like that, and I feel like this kind of bookends it as well with the story of this girl. So yeah, this one, it really tugs at the heartstrings.
I mean, I really liked it, but like, it just felt like I would like a little bit more breathing room for, one of the stories. But I do like the idea that this could have been the series finale. And that's kind of where you go out, how you go out with, Superman, because when we do get to the series finale, it's kind of like, uh, because it wasn't supposed to be a series finale. But alrighty. The next episode, we're going to jump to season 4, The Wedding of Superman. So here we are now in our colored episodes. Season 4, episode 8. While answering some letters for an advice columnist, Lois dozes off. She awakens to a delivery of flowers from Superman, and events quickly lead up to a marriage proposal from the Man of Steel. However, if a gang of crooks against whom Lois can testify have their way, the wedding will never take place. So this is my first time watching a colored episode. There was nothing from season 3 on the list here, so too bad season 3 or 5. And you definitely felt that feel. I mean, that shift in the tone and how Lois is played, and seeing Noel Neal's strawberry red hair. Um, and my other thing that I thought was shocking is in Lois's dream, her dream Lois figures out that Clark and Superman are the same.
Yeah. I will say it is very much an outlier though, even within the color episodes, because uh I know another one coming up with Superman's wife. I mean, to my knowledge, and I'm not all the way through all the color episodes, but I've almost all of them, and just the idea of romance is so rarely even broached on the show. So the
Yeah.
fact that that was the driving theme of this, of her answering these lovelorn letters, and then becoming distraught herself and having this dream where Superman finally proposes to her and reveals his identity and everything like that. I mean, it really stands out because it was such an outlier. So yeah, I don't know how representative I would say this is of the color episodes, but yeah, I mean, it's wild just to see the two of them in, and look, it was very chaste and very tame, but just to see the two of them embracing and talking closely and sweetly and intimately to each other, it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
It was so just so different from the way their dynamic had always been. Like, it was just not a thing. Like at the end of Around the World with Superman, at the end of season 2 that we were just talking about, it's like when Lois and Superman are standing there watching the family reunite, and she looks up at Superman. He runs away. He literally runs away. With one thing that bothers me is like it never in the wedding of Superman. He says to Lois like, "Oh, I've always been so busy." Right? Because she's like, "Oh, have you never talked to me like this before?" He's like, "Well, I've always been so busy." I do wish that the show had more specifically or articulated why he hadn't pursued this before. I mean, other than just being busy, right? But like,
Yeah. Like,
my responsibility. I don't want you to be in danger, like whatever the case may
but
be.
actually develop this as a subplot
Yeah,
than just Lois's
yeah,
fantasy, because this episode, as fun as it was at times, but at the beginning, I feel like they really diminished Lois because she's helping a columnist. Like she wants to get on this crime reports, and she's helping a columnist, and all these men are around and they're putting her down for writing these love letters or about these people um, who write in who have broken hearts for advice and all this. And Lois falls asleep reading all these letters and she's overwhelmed by it. And it's like they very much kind of like, oh, like almost like they pat her on the head, like, there, little girl. It's okay for your love and romance. Instead of recognizing like it's a true like feelings of people and their readers. Like, I don't know, it helps paint the role of how women were seen in the workplace at the time and culture. Um,
yeah. That's the thing. As much as Lois Lane, the character generally was ahead of her time. I think an instance like the scene you're talking about is unfortunately a product of its time, and that dismissive attitude towards her and these letters that she's responding to. It was frustrating from Perry's point of view. It's like, well, if this is such a joke to you, why is this a part of your newspaper? Um, but the fact that Henderson and the public defender are as dismissive as they are and kind of laugh her off is one thing, but the fact that Superman played into that as well really didn't sit right. And that's where I would have been happy to have more of that season 1 or season 2 urgency if he's just like, I've got to go, as
yeah.
opposed to like lingering, but making light of this. So I really didn't like the way that played. But on this note, and you brought this up at the beginning too, of I was one of my other observations watching a lot of the color episodes is that um I mean, I don't, I don't want to slam this version of Clark as being condescending, but there are times where it does have that air because there are a number of episodes that I was clocking as I was watching them where it's like he knows what's going on, like he has the answer, and he purposely withholds it from the other characters. Like it's one thing if all the characters are in the dark and they're trying to figure it out together, but when he knows and he's not telling them, it really comes off as if he's treating them like children, and I really don't like that lane for the character at all. And so that was something that I kind of noticed a bunch of times, particularly in the color episodes.
Yeah, I agree. Well,
You ready for
so
more
then
kryptonite?
Yeah. Season 4, episode 11, The Deadly Rock. I like how much smaller these summaries get. A friend who is suspectable, susceptible, I cannot talk today, to kryptonite radiation visits Clark at the time a scientist offers to sell some kryptonite to the mob. Wow. The Deadly Rock. Um, this episode and the color episodes, okay. Um, really when you start to see how, you know, their costuming, how they'd wear the same outfits over and over because of how they shot certain things. Like Jim's vest and everything here is very prominent. You see recurring.
Yeah. So a couple of things about the Deadly Rock. So one, the actor playing Gary Allen played
Yep.
Batman in
Yep.
the Batman and Robin serial. So I know
I
a
was
lot of,
about to.
I think a lot of people like this for that. It is notable.
Yep.
It's like the closest you get to a world's finest team up of this era. But as far as the episode itself, and I rewatched it last night, man, I don't know. I feel like this this leaves a lot to be desired. For one thing, and this is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine with Adventures of Superman, it's like they're always throwing these random best friends at us that Clark has that you never hear about or see before, and you never see or hear them again. But for that one episode, it's like, oh, Clark's best friend is coming into town. I can get past that. I guess what really irked me about this was that there's no explanation ever given for why kryptonite affects Gary Allen the way it does, why it makes him weak and sick like it does Superman, and why, while he's experiencing these effects, he is also impervious to harm. It's just never explained. And there's this business about how he had been in a plane. Oh, on a positive note, though, it's a rare instance of continuity. Like there's
Yep.
actually continuity. They reference the asteroid from Panic in the Sky. So points for that. And they talk about how he was Gary Allen was in this plane crash when the meteors hit, very shades of Smallville, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they just one line about, oh, I think being in that crash like did something to him, and that's why kryptonite is affecting him. Fine, I'll go with it. But the fact it's just not answered. Oh man, it really. It's because it's such an obvious question. It's like, how do you let that? How do you just let that go?
The plane was struck by lightning while there was the kryptonite, and he absorbed some of its energy. Smallville logic.
Yeah.
Little nice little tidbit here. Robert Lowry and George Reeves previously appeared in Sex Hygiene, 1942, put out by the War Department as an educational film for soldiers. Gotta get my hands on that film.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think it is interesting. The the recent Batman Echoes comic book did make references to the names of Robert Lowry and the other one that I cannot remember, the other Batman off the
Oh,
top of
from the
my.
first serial. Yeah.
Yeah,
I still have those DVDs and never pop them in. One day, maybe.
I have them too, and I think I've watched a little bit of one, but I like to just have them to say I have them. But yeah, the character of Professor Van Wyck was really odd.
Yeah, that got very over the top. You mentioned this at the beginning about why didn't Superman just use his heat vision? I mean, he did have, so in the show he uses his X-ray vision to cause fires, a la heat vision, which was the precursor to heat vision
Yeah.
in the comics. So he had a mechanism for this. That's the other thing that kind of bothered me about this one, where he uses the flamethrower or whatnot to start the fire, and it's just like, why not use your natural abilities? But yeah, it was. I wanted to like this episode more. The fact that we have that actor, the fact that we have a rare reference to another episode, the fact that we have another instance of kryptonite, which for 104 episodes, kryptonite pops up very, very rarely. But yeah, I don't know. The lack of an explanation bothered me, and also too, I realized this upon rewatch. I, like they don't really give Gary Allen much of a character.
Mm.
There's not much you could really say about him. He mostly just gets sick, and that's it.
Yep. He's just there to be sick. Sad. Sad,
Yeah.
sad, sad. So the next episode, season 6, episode 9, Superman's wife. A beautiful policewoman is asked to pose as Superman's wife in order to help him break up a gang of bank robbers. I actually like this episode because I like the fact that she's a policewoman. Sergeant Helen J. O'Hara. And they come up with this idea that if Superman had a wife, that they would come after her and, lead them to their hideout and everything. So uh, I thought that was cool. And when they referred to her as Mrs. Superman, instead of, I thought that was kind of funny. Like, yeah, Mrs. Superman. And how Lois gets jealous and how like all the other men are kind of like jealous. And then at the end when she's like, "Oh, she didn't really marry Superman." Jim's like, "Oh, so you're off the market now, or you're on the market, whatever." He's like, "You want to marry me?" Like, it's like, wow. But Lois's jealousy was interesting because, like you said, we never get romance, and Miss O'Hara here, she was a little flirtatious,
Yeah,
and
so Joy Lansing, the actress, I mean, just an absolute knockout beauty, and I think really a standout of this episode. I think that when this episode kind of pops up on people's list, I think it's probably uh, for that reason. I mean, she was just strikingly beautiful, and yeah, an intriguing setup. It was fun, and to your point, right? And tying into what we've been saying, just the fact that you have that jealousy. It was just territory the show like almost never got into, and maybe because of the time, it was aimed at a younger audience. Uh, I guess it lined up with the comics of the day. They weren't getting to that territory either, but. I always welcomed any opportunity for like something, and so yeah, the lowest angle I think really added something here.
we have the great setup of um they're gonna rob the this armored car, and Superman, they have her, basically stuck to the bridge. They're going to blow up, and Superman shows up and tells the armored car, "Just go the other way into town." So it never shows up. What they timed it, I thought was great. And yeah, I really enjoyed this one actually. What's funny is this is the episode that took me the longest to watch because I kept getting interrupted or stopped every time I'd start watching it. And I was like, "Come on, people! I'm trying to watch Superman here."
Gotcha. And another episode where it's like they don't know who the big boss is. Like that comes up a number of times in these episodes where there's some criminal syndicate and like no one knows who's behind it all, and they have to lure them out.
Yeah, the individual people don't know. That was also in the love letter episode because
Right.
in Lois's dream, she thought it was,
The public
uh,
defender. Yeah.
yeah, because she wakes up like, "I put you in bed." He's like, "What? What are you talking about?" All right, so the last two are actually, it's kind of a two-parter, basically. The Perils of Superman and All That Glitters uh, are the last two. They're not really a two-parter. My bad. Uh, I was looking at it wrong when it was popping up here. But the Perils of Superman. A criminal was sent to prison by Superman, and the planet staff goes to the planet's office and tells them uh to I cannot. I'm done reading. I'm done. I'm done. He tells them of his intentions to go after them. They respond that Superman will stop him. Only problem is that he wears a lead mask to conceal his identity, and he has other men wearing the same mask. Eventually, he captures all the planet's staff and puts them in a perilous situation, and Superman has but minutes to save each of them. So I'm watching this one, right? I start this one, and my kids come in when he walks in with the mask, and they're like, "What? What is this?" I'm like, "It's old Superman. Just sit down and watch with me." And I like how it's shot where he goes in and like the people that he's interacting with in the planet don't see him, you know, and like, and then we don't see him. He comes into the office and you have Perry's reaction, and then like the camera turns and we see the big lead mask.
Yeah.
It was cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think most notable. about these two episodes and the one before it. The last three episodes were all directed by George Reeves, and I haven't made my way through all of season 6 yet. But like, what's interesting, just in terms of talking to other fans and what I have watched of the color seasons, I think things really dip in season 5, and then from what I've gathered, I think season 6 is somewhat of a return to form. Maybe not rising to the level of the black and white episodes, but at least maybe kind of getting back to the stronger color episodes. Uh, so there's kind of that at play, but just the fact that George directed these last few, certainly interesting. And this one in particular, yeah, this ode to the old cliffhanger serials and everything with all the death traps. Like with Perry and the saw and Jimmy in the car and Clark over the acid and all that, right? I mean, how effectively did you feel like all of that was like? Did you buy into it? Did you? I mean, obviously you know they're going to be okay, but it's like, did you did you feel like they were pulled off well, or did it kind of
I
leave
think for
some
the most part
exhaustion?
it did,
Yeah,
but I loved like I mean you can't go wrong with the old train tracks, damsel in distress.
yeah,
The Perry on the saw, yeah. But Clark in the acid was great because they actually put him in the acid.
yeah,
Because they even say when they're in jail at the end, like, did we put him in the acid? How did he? And he's like, just never mind, like. And I thought that was kind of a hilarious because like they're super serious, like they're trying to kill off the Daily Planet staff, and
yeah.
they're like, we put Kent in the acid. We put him in the
Question for you.
yeah,
I know we still have to talk about all that glitters. Do you think that they would have been better off flipping the order of these last two?
yes,
Like, right? I agree.
yes. Um, it almost makes me wish they would have just done that on sub
Yeah,
on
on
for
subsequent
future.
airings and on the
Yes,
DVD.
thank
I
you.
know, I know. I mean, I think, and that's unfortunately the shame with this, where they were planning to come back, and then of course George Reeves died. John Hamilton died as well, played Perry White, and that was it. Like it just stopped. I mean, at the same time though, I do kind of wonder because this show was not serialized. We had almost no references to prior episodes and things like that. No multi-part episodes. Even the Unknown People. It was an hour-long movie that was chopped up. It wasn't like they meant to do a
Hmm.
two-part episode. I wonder if they would have done a proper series finale, quote
Yeah,
unquote, and what that even would have looked like for them at the time. Like, I have no idea.
I mean, like you stated earlier, Around the World with Superman would have been a great closer.
Yeah,
But yes, w- watching these two back to back because these two I got to sit down and watch back to back with my kids and my father-in-law, and the fact that the last episode, All That Glitters, is your last beat, you're just kind of like like it fizzles, you know. If I completely agree, if they would flip these two, and I would recommend to anybody watching them flip these two and go out with The Perils of Superman as your final episode, because All That Glitters, Professor Pepperwinkle isolates a dose of kryptonite he calls kryptonite called positive K, which winds up giving Lois and Jimmy the same types of powers as Superman. There's so much more to this episode than that, but um the professor starts off inside the Daily Planet talking about how he can make gold. There's all this talk about, oh, if we can make gold, blah blah blah. Um, that's going to destroy the economy in Fort Knox. Then they go and it's Lois and Jimmy sitting in a diner talking about this and casually. And just side note, why did Jack Larson cut his hair like to like a buzz cut? Because like his early Jimmy Olsen hair looked great.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I don't know.
but this look does not look good. Um, but he so they do this whole thing. These gangsters kidnap the professor. They want him to make them gold, like how many millions dollars worth of gold. So the professor basically rigs it up that when they come into his lab, they'll get knocked out by a sandbag. Well, it hits Jimmy in the head, and that's when we get the Superman has positive and negative K energy, And when they, they cancel each other out, and he made these pills, and Jimmy and Lois take them, and we see Jimmy and Lois flying. They see their super strength. They go out a window. It's all whimsical. Um, Only later to discover that this is Jim's dream while being hit over the head with the sandbag. Because for the most of the episode, there is no Superman. Like, Clark is at the beginning, and then he shows up at the end to save the day. That's it. And the big twist is it takes $10,000 worth of platinum to make $5,000 worth of gold. And it was just like, oh, shucks,
Yeah, I mean, a Pepperwinkle episode with a dream sequence is an unfortunate note, I think, to go out on. I mean, maybe there's some appeal in the spectacle of seeing the other two with powers, but yeah, I mean, an unfortunate closer for the series.
Yeah. I mean, it just, we, like you said, this aired April 28th, 1958. And they did get renewed for another season, but, George had passed away. So, which is interesting how much time, was between when this aired and when they were realized they were going to get picked up for another season. Because George, he died in June of 59. And this aired April. So almost a year later, he dies, and that's when they're like, "Oh, we're going to do another season." So, I mean, I guess they were just, like, I guess this would be, like you said earlier, like a show that you could very easily just rerun it in any order. The only thing that would throw you off is the color, the black and white, and then the random appearance of Phyllis Coates.
Well, and so my understanding is that the reason they wanted to do another season was to have enough episodes where they could essentially, I think, like more or less ditch the that first season that was so much darker, and really just kind of have this package of the seasons 2 through 7. I think that was the idea. I feel like I came
Ooh,
across that at some point.
ooh,
But
interesting. It almost makes you know how, like, with Superboy, how it was Superboy, and then later the Adventures of Superboy, and how they kind of kept trying to retool that. Like, this is the Adventures of Superman. If they had just had that first season, like, and just retitled it or something, and then the seasons, 2 through the
yeah,
fictitious 7 were something else, trying to help distinguish
yeah, man,
that
totally.
error. But, I really am enjoying watching this series. It's definitely something that's fun. It's, of its time, but it's always nice to kind of go back and see it where the character evolved from. Because, one thing we laughed about watching Mole Men is, this is golden age. He punches
Yeah.
people, and he fights, and, he's just more enhanced. Um, the flying came from the radio. So,
Yeah, no, look, it's definitely an aspect of the Superman mythology that, particularly among I think people of our age and younger, it's often overlooked, but it deserves the consideration. I mean, I wouldn't be doing a rewatch podcast if I didn't think it deserved it. And those first couple of seasons in particular, there's genuinely well done, compelling episodes. What they were able to accomplish with their rushed production schedule, their limited budget, the limitations of the technology of the day, it's really astounding. And ultimately, and the sense that I've gotten from all of the Adventures of Superman fans that I've interacted with, really it was that George Reeves performance that people found so captivating, and I think that's the magic of the show. You buy him in this role, and yes, those color seasons really become something else. There are some highlights in there. There are a few that I've watched that I would hold up against the first couple of seasons, but overall, they are not the strongest episodes in the series. And so when you look at the whole thing, there's a little bit of an asterisk next to it, but it's an important part of the mythology. And it is one of those things where I feel like, I don't know, a lot of times I don't know. It feels like, oh, it all started with Christopher Reeve on screen, but it's like, no, like there was this whole, and to your earlier point, even before George, there was a Kirk Allen, but there was this show that really, introduced not just one generation, because it would continue to air in reruns for decades, but it introduced so many fans to the character and really set the model. And like I was mentioning earlier, the Triangle eras, the comic book creators were fans of this version, and you see that in the post Crisis comics of this very
Hmm.
confident, capable Clark. So it has kind of had this influence in various ways. So I'm glad you've been watching, and thank you for having me on for this, man. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it has been. I've told you this before, and I've told Jania and I. Was it I think back in 2023, for part of our Superman Day special, we watched and talked about the I Love Lucy episode that has Superman / George Reeves in it, because that was my first exposure to George, because my great grandmother would watch I Love Lucy reruns all the time. So that was my first time seeing him as Superman. And it's just like you said, it leaves a legacy to be. Now, last question for you, sir, before you head out here. Anthony's 2-episode pick that was not on the list for people to check out.
Oh, I picked 2 episodes that weren't on here.
Yet, pick 2 episodes that wasn't on this list that people should go check out.
Okay. So easily from season 2, The Face and the Voice, one of my absolute, probably my, I don't know, that and Panic in the Sky. I always go back and forth. And then I'm going to surprise you because I'm going to pick a color episode. But Clark Kent Outlaw from season 3 was particularly strong. I was very pleasantly surprised by that as I've been going through them. So I wanted to have a representation, because I know we've kind of been down on the color episodes. So Clark Kent Outlaw from season 3 and The Face and the Voice from season 2.
All right, there you go. All right, everybody. Thanks for checking out our first episode. Remember,
look up in the sky!
Thank you for checking out the Krypton Report. Please click our link tree in the show notes to follow us on your favorite social media platform. We have a $1 Patreon, just $1 a month to keep us going. And in return, you get exclusive shows and specials. If you want to join us on an episode, send us an email or a message.